Jason Todd came into existence because Dick Grayson was promoted to be Nightwing, and people thought that Batman needed a Robin.
Robin was no longer part of Batman. Batman had gone solo for a while, and we quickly realized Batman without a Robin was not the healthy character.
When Jason Todd was introduced, he was kind of a carbon copy of Dick Grayson. He was also from the circus. He fought in a circus costume. He was very up and peppy. He was very much like Dick Grayson.
I think in a lot of minds, people who are occupying big offices, you know, Batman and Robin were this thing. And this is what made it successful, and you don't want to screw around with something that at that point had been successful for years and years, for decades.
So by Dick Grayson moving up and taking somebody who has the same basic skill sets, same origin, same background as Dick Grayson, and moving him into the same role, he really didn't change much.
And then in typical, what is now typical comic book fashion, at the time was a big deal, there was this massive miniseries called Crisis on Infinite Earths. It changed everything in the DC universe, and it gave them the opportunity to literally change characters on a dime. This massive crisis occurred, and when we came back, the characters were different.
Once we had the whole, you know, realigning of the DC universe with the Crisis on Infinite Earths, there was really a chance to make Jason Todd his own person instead of being the carbon copy of Dick Grayson.
And in Jason Todd's case, he was not a kid from the circus whose parents were killed in the circus, just like Dick Grayson. He was actually an orphan, kind of a tough, streetwise kid who first meets Batman when he's trying to steal the tires off of the Batmobile.
So that was Batman's first introduction to him, and he saw this kid who had this raw talent, who had this aggressiveness, that could be heading down the wrong road, and that's when Bruce Wayne, Batman, decided to take him under his wing.
That's the new Robin. And I think from the jump, a lot of people didn't like him.
When you're changing the norm in any part of any media, there's always going to be fear of backlash. So to take a Robin, who had been an established character for decades at that point, definitely was taking a chance.
And it was one of the more interesting evolutions you've ever seen of a character in comics.
What was happening was kind of interesting, in that Robin was suddenly not this virtuous guy, but he was difficult. If you're doing difficult characters who are fulfilling the role of hero, it's a tricky line to walk. You can't make them so disagreeable that the audience doesn't like them or doesn't admire them on some level. And that, I don't know that anybody planned for that to happen to Jason Todd, but it did. My impression is that he was not a very popular character, and he did take on a life of his own.
They began this rather long storyline called Death in the Family, and Denny had been dropping seeds before this where, I think to quote Denny, because I've heard him say it many, many times, we just made him the most unlikable snot imaginable.
And I thought he had become a snot.
I think Denny sort of had his crazy idea. Since people don't seem to like him so much, since we do get a lot of good old-fashioned hate mail, back in the days when you actually wrote it out and mailed it, they got letters saying how much they did not like Jason Todd. He went into the offices and said how would they feel about killing him off. And it was debated and decided that they would give that a try. And not only kill him off, but what if we leave it up to the fans who say they don't like him so much? Let them put their money where their mouth is. If they really don't like him this much, we'll leave it up to them if they want to kill him off. And that, I think, was where the idea was born to really make Jason unlikable.
Since the days of Aristotle and his Poetics and the rise of Greek drama, stories have always been theories of change. How do people change? Why don't they change? How do cultures change? Why do they remain stagnant? Our deepest fascination is with change. We don't tell stories about how things remain the same. That's not interesting.
I think we had gotten to a point where the writers didn't feel the Jason Todd character was working. And they were casting about for a solution.
We all decided that we would, if we could find a way to make it happen, we would let the readers decide Jason Todd's fate. I think in my mind was the realization that at the very least we'll get a story out of this, capital S story.
This entire storyline that led up to Jason being brutally beaten by Joker, the crowbar, this legendary scene. They're in a warehouse, nearly beats him to death, leaves him for dead. Batman is racing to get to him. He's almost there in time, and the building blows up with Jason inside. Batman digs through the rubble, pulls him out, and lifts him up, and and we don't know what happens next. The comic actually ends with the building blowing up and left two numbers, a 1-900 number for him to live and a 1-900 number for him to die.
The phone company would not allow me to use the word death. So he survived, or if you dialed the other number, he didn't survive.
And it was 50 cents per call, so you had to really believe in what you were voting in.
And they got 10,000 calls, which seemed like a lot at the time.
The creative people figured out how to build a story so it could have two alternative endings, and we could have them both ready to go to press.
And I vividly remember that Mary Fran, my wife, and I were in my office at 7 p.m. and we had an arrangement with the phone company where we could call and get the numbers.
And they voted for him to die. And that's what they ran. And so that was the death of Robin. As many said, because the readers asked for it.
The great big stunt I thought was over. Mary Fran and I went out and had dinner. And then, for about 3 days, I spent my office time talking on the phone. There was enormous reaction, and I think a lot of the people who were reacting didn't realize it was not the Robin that they grew up with.
Characters die in comics all the time now, but back then, even though it was the 80s, and, people did die, but not these type of characters, not these that were so prominent, and for especially a kid to die.
Well, first of all, let me speak to the shock. I wanted people to remember we didn't kill a real kid, This is paper and ink. This is a story. This is a fable. I was wearing, instead of my hippie peace button, a Batman signal on my lapel in those days. And in a deli on Fifth Avenue, a guy asked why I had it, and I told him who I was. Hey, this is the guy that killed Robin!
I think we were all stunned. I think when the character was voted to die, we were all a little bit taken aback.
Our publicity person at the time decided not to put any of us on television. I questioned that at the time. Now I'm glad, because I had to take the E train down to Soho every night, and I wouldn't have wanted this face to be recognized as the killer of Robin. And some of the fans were very upset.
I always thought it was a mistake. It was one of those, something got out of hand. We all got caught up in the momentum of this event and let the wrong thing happen. And I don't think in many ways we've ever fully recovered from it.
We didn't have a bias as to whether Jason would live or die. But I think a lot of the creative people weren't disappointed when the answer was that he got to get killed.
The fans voted on it. There's still that controversy that someone called the number numerous times, basically stuffed the box, and you know, I guess forced the character to die.
Well, I heard it was a lawyer who was using a Macintosh and lived in California. I obviously don't have hard information on this, but I heard that someone out there programmed his computer to dial the negative number every couple of minutes. And since there was only about 65 votes that made the difference, if that story's true, that guy killed Jason Todd.
Find him, then you're off the hook.
Yeah, right. It's his fault.
The bottom line, realistically, is we're God. If we hadn't wanted to kill him off, no matter what the viewers and the readers wrote in, the result is what we say the result is.
The immediate effect it had on me was to change my mind about what I was doing for a living. I thought I was a writer-editor working in this odd little literary backwater. Coming off of that experience, I realized I am the custodian of modern folklore. Ooh.
The death story and the voting on the death engendered an interesting debate about whether our readership was bloodthirsty, whether we were in some fashion kind of encouraging blood and circuses by doing this. At a time when comics were generally getting somewhat darker and more violent, this became one of the easy things to seize on, to say, oh, they shouldn't have done that. That's an icon. He should never be hurt.
I think at the end of the day, it was the better choice. It was the more interesting choice. To have a character survive just another battle is just another month in comics. But when you lose a character like that, it definitely sends more complex messages out there that make it interesting to read.
The promise I made to the comics community was, on my watch, he won't be back. We wanted some deaths to be permanent. I mean, it's the biggest cliche in comic books, that nobody ever stays dead. I kind of suspected that other editors down the line would not feel bound by that, nor should they have.
But then when it got to be my time to take over Batman, the first thing I said is, I want to bring back Jason Todd.
There's actually points when we brought Jason Todd back from the dead after Infinite Crisis or during Infinite Crisis that I'm at conventions on panels and people come up to me and say, why don't you give me my 50 cents back? I voted for him to die and now you brought him back to life. I should get my 50 cents back. And I'm like, you know, I appreciate your thought on that. And I said, I voted for him to die too. So guess what? I'm not giving myself 50 cents. You're not going to get it either.
So you have to ask yourself, who was going to be Jason Todd's Nightwing? Who was he going to become? The question wasn't answered at the time. It was something I always thought about. You know, when I sort of extrapolating these characters, who were allowed to grow up? Would this Robin be allowed to grow up? He wasn't, he died. But as a writer, when it came my turn to take on these characters, I decided to sort of continue what he would be, which would be the best way to sum him up would be a really, really horrible good guy. When we reintroduced Jason Todd and became the Red Hood, I was a little surprised about how many of the readers liked him. Liked him in a way of liking him as a hero. Basically, the simplest way to put it is they thought he was cool. And that was not really my intention.
I think it speaks loads of the modern audience that this anti-hero would appeal to them. It's a different world. It's one thing for the Joker to be this insane maniac that really has no reason and is just twisted. And now you have the Red Hood, which has this deeper meaning of it's not just a twisted version of Batman. It's this version of Batman that has been created by Batman.
I believe we go to the movies, we go to art, we go to comic books to see how the culture is dreaming. And in different periods of history, we have different cultural dreams.
As storytellers, it gets us a place to go. It gets us someplace interesting. Batman, in this case, isn't just chasing a criminal. He's chasing a fellow vigilante, just one who just goes way too damn far as far as he's concerned.
I see him as a villain. I think he's crossed the line. I think that he has lost what it takes to be heroic. I think what he believes is the ends justifies the means, and that any end justifies any means, and I don't believe that's the attitude of any true hero.
There's a part of us that wants to identify with the villain. There's a part of us that chafes a little bit at the normal constraints that are put on your life. And one of the things these kinds of characters do is allow you a fantasy escape.
It's a tougher world, and I think Jason Todd becomes more of that anti-hero. There's a much bigger line for him to cross now, and Batman won't cross that line and actually kill criminals. Jason Todd does.
I think the introduction of Jason Todd as the anti-hero and under the Red Hood, I think it's a significant. It really points out and hammers home that Batman considers Jason Todd as his greatest failure.
The anti-hero is angry at the lies of the day, and he is desirous of showing you that. So Jason Todd and the Red Hood character want to flaunt the cultural disintegration right in front of us. They're embodying this for us. They're not going to be a cute little sidekick.
I just got a postcard in the mail, which apes one of the Jason Todd covers, the Red Hood covers. And what they did is they have Jason Todd holding the Red Hood, and in the original picture was a reflection of Batman's face, and actually they superimposed my face in the reflection, saying, "No, I'm not a hero. I'm not a villain. Make me a hero again."
The Jason Todd who is running around today was born out of these little simple ideas like, let's make him a street tough. Let's make him a tough kid. Let's make him rebellious. Now becomes another full-fledged character running around the DCU who works so well in the Batman mythos.
The characters that stay in publication are the ones that are allowed to change. And that is both the trickiest part of being an editor of this kind of stuff, and one of the things that makes it really one of the most interesting jobs on earth.